4 disturbing fake cop horror stories. It happened when I was 16. I was walking home from school, taking my usual route through the quiet residential streets. I liked walking. The exercise helped clear my mind, and I lived close enough to school that it never seemed like a hassle. The sidewalks were lined with tall, swaying trees that cast long shadows as the sun began to set. It was the kind of serene evening where everything seemed calm and ordinary, just another walk home, or so I thought. As I turned the corner onto one of the quieter streets, I noticed a car before I noticed the man. It was a black sedan, older but well kept, parked neatly along the side of the road. At first, it didn't seem out of place. It blended in with the neighborhood's usual rhythm. But as I got closer, something caught my eye movement. Standing beside the car was a man. He was tall, wearing what appeared to be a police uniform. His posture was stiff, almost too rigid, and his gaze seemed to pierce right through me. There was something about him that immediately felt off. His uniform didn't quite fit right, and the absence of a badge was glaring. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was a plainclothes officer or someone helping out on a special assignment, but my instincts prickled. I quickened my pace, keeping my gaze fixed ahead, but I could feel his eyes following me. Each step I took seemed to echo louder in my ears. "Hey, miss," a deep voice called out from behind me. My stomach churned. Something about his tone made me want to keep moving, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't stop. I didn't even turn my head. "Miss." His voice was firmer now, commanding, almost demanding. "I need to talk to you." Against my better judgment, I stopped and turned around. The man was walking toward me now, his face set in a serious expression. His steps were deliberate, as if he wanted to seem in control, but there was an edge to his movements that made me uneasy. "You fit the description of a runaway," he said flatly, his tone devoid of any warmth or explanation. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Runaway? His words didn't make sense. I was in my school uniform, my backpack slung over my shoulder. Everything about me screamed student, not someone on the run. And why would a lone officer, without a patrol car or backup, handle something like this in the middle of a suburban street? "I'm not a runaway," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just walking home from school." His expression didn't change. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence looming. "I need you to come with me," he repeated, this time reaching out and grabbing my arm. His grip was firm, too firm. The alarm bells in my head were deafening now. This wasn't right. Real police didn't act like this, especially not without identifying themselves properly. My heart pounded as I tried to pull my arm away. "I need to call my mom first," I said, panic creeping into my voice. "She can clear this up." "You don't need to call anyone," he snapped, his grip tightening. "Let's go." My mind raced. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but his hold on my arm was unyielding. Summoning every ounce of strength, I yanked my arm free and bolted. I didn't look back. My feet pounded against the pavement as I sprinted down the street, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I had no plan, no clear destination, just an overwhelming need to get away. A house with its lights on came into view. Without hesitation, I ran to the door, pounding on it frantically. My chest heaved as I turned to glance over my shoulder, half expecting the man to be right behind me. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged woman. Her eyes widened at the sight of me, disheveled and panicked. "Please help me," I cried. "A man. He tried to take me. He said he was a cop, but I don't think he really is." Before I could say more, she pulled me inside and locked the door. My body trembled as I tried to catch my breath. Her husband appeared, concern etched on his face. The woman grabbed her phone and dialed 911 while her husband peered through the curtains. "Is he still out there?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I looked too, but the street was empty. The black sedan and the man were gone, swallowed by the growing shadows of the evening. Minutes later, the real police arrived. They listened intently as I recounted everything: the man, his uniform, his words, and the way he grabbed me. I described his car, the ill-fitting uniform, and his unsettling demeanor. The officers exchanged grim looks as they jotted down notes. They told me there had been similar reports in the area. A man posing as a police officer, targeting young women walking alone. My stomach twisted at their words. This wasn't an isolated incident. The police drove me home that night. My parents were beside themselves with worry when they heard what had happened. My mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and my dad's usual calm demeanor was replaced with visible fear. For days, I couldn't shake the experience. Every time I stepped outside, I found myself scanning the street, half expecting to see the black sedan or the man's piercing gaze. A week later, the police returned with an update. They had found the black sedan abandoned in a parking lot. Inside, they discovered a disturbing collection of items: police equipment, fake badges, uniforms, and even a dashboard siren light. Whoever this man was, he had planned these encounters meticulously, but they never caught him. He vanished, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of unease. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation. People whispered about the man in the black sedan, wondering if he was someone local or if he had targeted our area by chance. Some claimed to have seen him lurking near schools and parks, always keeping his distance, but never far enough to go unnoticed. Even now, years later, I still think about him. I wonder if he moved on to another town, another city, continuing his sinister charade. The memory of his hand gripping my arm, pulling me toward an unknown, terrifying fate, remains vivid. It's a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always look like a monster in the dark. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it pretends to be the very thing you're supposed to trust. And that's what makes it truly terrifying. Looking back, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts that day. Running may have saved my life, but the experience left me with an unsettling truth. Not all monsters hide in the shadows. Some walk among us, disguised in authority, waiting for their next opportunity. It started as an ordinary evening, the kind you don't think twice about. Gwen and I were lounging on the couch in our new home, enjoying a quiet night. Dinner plates sat empty on the coffee table, and the soft glow of the TV illuminated the room. We had recently moved to this peaceful neighborhood, drawn to its promise of safety and calm. For the first time in years, we felt like we could truly relax. We were halfway through a movie when Gwen leaned against me, letting out a contented sigh. "This place really is perfect, isn't it?" she murmured. "Yeah," I replied, my eyes fixed on the screen. "It's quiet, safe. Everything we wanted." But that night would shatter the illusion of safety in ways I couldn't have imagined. Around 9:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was sharp and sudden, jolting us from our relaxed state. Gwen and I exchanged a confused glance. We weren't expecting anyone, and it was rare for neighbors to drop by unannounced. "Who could that be?" Gwen asked, sitting up. "No idea," I said, standing. "I'll check." As I walked to the front door, a strange unease settled in my stomach. The hallway felt darker than usual, the shadows longer and deeper. I glanced at the peephole, but it was covered, blocked by something or someone. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response, just silence. I felt my chest tighten. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Was it a prank? A neighbor in need? Or something worse? Gwen appeared behind me, her brow furrowed. "What's going on? They're not answering," I whispered. "Don't open it," she urged, her voice low but firm. I nodded, stepping back from the door. Whoever it was, they weren't acting normal. I reached for my phone, ready to call anyone when the knocking started. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor or a friend. It was loud, deliberate, and relentless, echoing through the house. Gwen grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Maybe we should call the police," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded and dialed 911. As the operator picked up, I tried to explain the situation as calmly as I could. "Someone's at our door," I said, keeping my voice low. "They're not answering when we ask who they are, and they're acting strange." The operator assured me that officers were on their way and told us to stay inside and keep the doors locked. I relayed this to Gwen, who looked visibly shaken. The knocking stopped abruptly, plunging the house into an eerie silence. Gwen and I stood frozen, every muscle in our bodies tense. "Do you think they're gone?" she whispered. "I don't know," I replied. I moved cautiously to the living room, peering out through the curtains. The street outside was empty, the lamplight casting long shadows across the road. But something caught my eye, a figure standing across the street, just beyond the reach of the nearest streetlight. They were motionless, their face obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded as I stared at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "There's someone out there," I said, my voice barely audible. Gwen joined me, her eyes widening as she spotted the figure. "What do they want?" "I don't know," I said again, feeling a mix of fear and frustration. Minutes passed like hours as we waited for the police. The figure didn't move, didn't come closer, but their presence was suffocating. Then, just as the sound of distant sirens reached my ears, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. When the police arrived, Gwen and I explained everything. The officers searched the area, but found no one. They reassured us that it was likely just a prank or someone trying to scare us, but their words felt hollow. The rest of the night passed in a haze of paranoia. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind made us jump. Neither of us slept. The next morning, we found something that chilled us to the bone. Taped to our front door was a Polaroid picture. It showed our living room taken from outside the window. Gwen and I stared at the photo, our minds racing. How long had they been watching us? How close had they come? We handed the photo over to the police, who promised to investigate further, but deep down, we knew the damage was already done. Our sense of safety, of security, was shattered. In the weeks that followed, we installed cameras, motion sensors, and stronger locks. But no amount of technology could erase the memory of that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever it was, they weren't done with us. And every time I glanced out the window at night, I half expected to see that figure standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. For Gwen and me, the house that once felt like a sanctuary had become a prison. We were constantly on edge, jumping at every sound, every shadow. One night, as we sat in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a movie, the motion detector in the backyard went off. The small alarm on the security system beeped, sending a chill down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and hesitated before opening the back door. Gwen grabbed my arm. "Don't," she pleaded, but I couldn't ignore it. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness as I scanned the yard. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice echoing. For a moment, there was nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling the trees. Then I saw it, another Polaroid, taped to the side of the house. This one was of our bedroom. I backed away, my hands trembling, and went inside, locking the door behind me. Gwen took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I showed her the photo, and her reaction mirrored mine: shock, fear, and disbelief. We called the police again, but there was little they could do. Whoever was doing this was careful, calculated, We knew we couldn't stay in the house any longer. Within a week, we packed up and moved, leaving behind the place we once thought would be our forever home. But even in our new place, the fear lingers. Every time the doorbell rings, every time I see a shadow move outside, I'm reminded of that night. Some people think monsters hide in the dark corners of the world, but the truth is, the scariest ones are the people who walk among us, unseen, their intentions unknown. And the worst part, you never see them coming until it's too late. It was a quiet evening at home, the kind where the world outside feels distant and everything inside seems peaceful. I was sitting on the couch, watching some late-night talk show, while Gwen dozed off beside me. We were both exhausted from a long day at work, the kind of day that drains you to your core. The clock on the wall read 10:45 p.m. It was late enough to start winding down, but not so late that we were completely out of it. The street outside our window was unusually still. No cars passing by, no neighbors walking their dogs, no faint music from the next house over, just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around you, making you notice every little creak and rustle. That's why the sudden knock at the door felt so jarring. It shattered the stillness, sending a ripple of unease through the air. Gwen stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Did you hear that?" she murmured groggily. "Yeah," I said, glancing toward the front door. "Who could it be at this hour?" We exchanged a look, both of us instantly on edge. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people dropped by unannounced, especially not this late. My first thought was that maybe a neighbor needed help, someone in trouble, but even as that crossed my mind, it didn't feel right. The knock was too deliberate, too firm, like whoever was on the other side knew exactly what they were doing. I stood up, my pulse quickening as I moved toward the door. Gwen sat up on the couch, watching me closely, her face a mix of curiosity and worry. I hesitated as I reached the door, leaning close to the peephole to see who it was. Through the small glass lens, I saw a man standing on the porch. He was dressed in what appeared to be a police uniform, navy blue, with patches on the shoulders and a shiny badge on his chest. His cap was pulled low, shadowing his face, but he looked to be in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with sharp features. At first glance, he looked official, but as I studied him, something about his presence made me uneasy. I cracked the door open slightly, just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but oddly flat. "I'm Officer Barnes with the local police. We've had reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood, and I need to come inside to ask you a few questions." His words didn't make sense. The street had been dead silent all night, and we hadn't heard a thing. I frowned, keeping my voice neutral. "A disturbance? We haven't seen or heard anything. What's going on?" The man's eyes flicked toward the street, avoiding mine. "It's routine," he said. "I just need to make sure everything is okay. Do you mind if I come in?" That's when the unease turned into something sharper. His demeanor was off, too stiff, too rehearsed. And now that I was paying closer attention, his uniform didn't seem quite right. It was almost too clean, too perfectly pressed, like it had never been worn on an actual patrol. The badge on his chest caught my eye, and my stomach tightened. It didn't have a name, just a generic emblem. "Can I see your ID?" I asked, not moving to open the door any further. The man's face stayed neutral, but there was something cold in his eyes. "I'm in uniform, sir. That should be enough. I need you to cooperate and let me inside." Behind me, I heard Gwen's soft footsteps as she approached. She peeked around the corner, her expression cautious. "Should we let him in?" she whispered, though her voice betrayed her doubt. I shook my head slightly, keeping my eyes on the man. "I don't think so," I murmured back. "Sir," the man said again, his tone sharper now. "This is official police business. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." That did it. The way he said it, like a veiled threat, set off every alarm bell in my head. Real police officers didn't act like this, at least, not without proper identification. I took a step back, pulling the door halfway shut. "If this is official," I said firmly, "I'll call the station to confirm. If you're really here for something, we'll cooperate." The man's expression darkened, and he stepped closer to the door. His voice dropped to a low, almost menacing growl. "Sir, I'm not asking again. Open the door." My instincts kicked into overdrive. This wasn't a cop. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but every fiber of my being told me he was dangerous. I stepped back fully, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Without missing a beat, I turned to Gwen. "Call 911, I said urgently. "Now." Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed. I stayed by the door, peering through the peephole again. The man hadn't left. He was pacing on the porch, muttering under his breath, his whole demeanor shifting from calm to agitated. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the street, like he was waiting for someone or something. When the dispatcher picked up, Gwen quickly explained what was happening. A man claiming to be a police officer was at our door, refusing to show ID and demanding to come inside. My heart sank when I heard the dispatcher's response. "We don't have any officers in your area tonight. Stay inside and lock your doors. A unit is on its way." I turned to Gwen, my voice shaking. "They said there are no cops nearby." Her face went pale. "Then who is he?" We stood there, frozen, listening to the silence outside. The man's pacing stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then, a loud knock echoed through the door. "I know you're in there," the man shouted. "Open the door." I backed away, pulling Gwen with me. "We wait," I said, though my voice faltered. "The real police are coming." Minutes passed like hours. The man knocked again, harder this time, but we didn't respond. Then, finally, the sound of sirens broke through the tense silence. The man must have heard them too, because he stopped knocking. I peeked through the peephole and saw him walking away quickly, disappearing into the shadows of the night. When the real officers arrived, their uniforms and badges were unmistakable. They listened as we explained what had happened, their expressions grave. "It's good you didn't open the door," one of them said. "People like that don't usually work alone. There's often someone waiting nearby, ready to move in if things go wrong." The thought made my stomach churn. We had been lucky to trust our instincts, lucky to call for help in time. That night changed everything. We installed extra locks, set up security cameras, and made a pact to never let our guard down. Because you never really know who might be knocking at your door. If you've ever experienced something like this, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay safe. Trust your instincts. They might just save your life.